I'm in the Key Memorial Chapel at Mount Olivet Cemetery with my good friend Chris Hall.
Yes, we go way back.
We go back as far as my history here in Frederick begins.
Indeed.
Actually, that's
I'm
where
working
we
on
go
that
back.
documentary. Yeah.
I actually would love to reach out to somebody who might have footage of some of our musicals back in our elementary school days. Have you always loved history?
I have.
Yeah,
And
so
how can you not love history if you live in Frederick, Maryland?
Yeah.
So my family, we moved here from northern Delaware in 1974. My dad was a history minor, a big history fan. So every weekend it was Harper's Ferry, Antietam, Gettysburg, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. So I got it honestly.
Yeah. So your dad really kind of
My
implanted
dad,
that in
yes,
you.
he did. And then family history as
Yeah.
well. He was kind of the family historian, so I kind of picked up that mantle from him.
Well, you have actually made an entire career out of knowing, loving, and appreciating the history in our region. You have company History Shark Productions.
Mm-hmm.
You've produced a lot of documentaries about this area, researched a ton, more than anybody. Does anyone know any more than you in Frederick?
I don't know. My mentor, John Ashbury, perhaps. But I've had a lot of great teachers along the way. To be able to do the documentaries, to be able to write history, and to be able to teach history. And now I'm teaching history under my History Shark Productions moniker. It's really been special. And I never thought I'd work for a cemetery. And here I am, community relations and historic preservation manager, but they brought me in here to really follow the lead of a lot of historic cemeteries around the country, some that aren't even active anymore, but how can you look at tourism and preservation for viability to really keep up the grounds? Because in a lot of cases with cemeteries, once all the lots are sold, and if they don't have some kind of perpetual care endowment or fund, you know, who's mowing the grass of these places?
Right.
And in our case here, we are an active cemetery. We are, of course, coming to you from Mount Olivet Cemetery.
Yeah.
But it's an active cemetery. But at the same time, the historic part of the cemetery, we have some issues with stones. It's not vandalism, it's just old age.
Yeah.
Back in the day, they didn't put foundations underneath stones. And the ground moves at times. I'm not going to tell you why. But when cavities below perhaps could fill, these monuments start leaning and tilting. Once these old marble gravestones start tilting, and a lot of times fall over and sometimes fall into other stones. So we started this preservation program, and I've got a friends group, Friends of Mount Olivet, where we have nearly 140 folks and a lot of retirees, but they come out and they clean stones and they repair. I have a team that repairs stones. But we also have those volunteers helping with research, and it's just been an incredible thing.
And look, I mean, I think that this was such the perfect place for you, really, in the sense that. I mean,
how do you mean that?
Yeah, I was just going to. I was really going to clarify.
There's some people that know there's a perfect place for somebody, and it's a cemetery. But in my case, I know where you're going.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is like no ordinary cemetery. I mean, there's the historic part of it in Frederick, and the proximity to downtown just makes it so special.
Indeed, it does.
Yeah.
Well, I think the one thing is when I was at Tourism, Visit Frederick, you know, our catchphrase that we came about right about the time I left there was billing Frederick or marketing it as hip and historic.
Oh.
Now, I want to be reverent here. You can't just say a cemetery is hip and historic, but in a way, we kind of mirror the historic district and downtown with this adaptive reuse. But, you know, once again, looking at art and culture in just a very special way. And that's what we have. I mean, this was originally founded in 1852 as a garden cemetery. A lot of people don't know what a garden cemetery is. This is a movement that started in the Northeast. As a matter of fact, Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it was kind of a departure from the old church graveyard where things are more orderly, puritanical. Used to have skull and crossbones on some stones. But here, it was kind of a convergence with the Victorian age and kind of this communing with nature and looking at death as communing with nature. Even the term cemetery translates from Greek to resting place,
Okay.
sleeping place.
Yeah.
And that's why you have things like rest in peace and all that. But the beautiful monuments and architecture that we have on our grounds, especially during that period, that Victorian era, the 1800s, where you have statues of women in mourning, and angels, and you have throwbacks to antiquity like obelisk and urns. But there was a real rhyme and reason, and it was kind of, again, looking at death as kind of this communing with nature, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and where a cemetery can be a place where you can have tree-lined avenues and flowers and exotic plantings and water features. And it was really amazing, very progressive that Frederick would do that in the 1850s. When you think about what a cemetery is, I mean, a cemetery is about memorialization. And I think here, do you want a cemetery that nobody comes to? That is a desolate, scary place, like, the connotations of Halloween, creepy cemetery. No, I think all of it's a reality that, we all will die. But I think they say, and this is a pertinent thing I tell groups all the time, they say you die 2 deaths. The first death is when, of course, the physical body shuts down. That's obvious. But they say the real death now is when nobody says your name anymore.
Oh.
People forget that you walk this earth. Nobody visits your grave.
Yeah.
And that is the true death of a person. Where they're really not in consciousness or memory anymore. And that's one of the things that I do here. Been doing for 8 years. I write a blog called Stories in Stone. Each week I push it out through our Mount Olivet Facebook site, and it's on our MountOlivetHistory.com site. But I give myself a week, and I am inspired by either a stone or a name, or I've come across a newspaper article about somebody from yesteryear, and I really concentrate and I try to tell that person's history in a blog form.
Wow.
Some people have told me I've broken the laws of blogs because I've gone too long, but I try to illustrate with pictures if I can find them, or at least where did they live here in town. And it's really been neat. But what I have a great support and readership in the community there. I'm able to kind of tell Frederick's story through the context of these individual people who lived it.
Everyday people.
And who gave us the Frederick we have today. So it's really been neat. And I've done my share of Francis Scott Key, Barbara Fritchie, and Thomas Johnson. But it's a lot of folks that are just little blips in the history annals and books, or have been forgotten in history, and in a way kind of bringing their story back to life.
How many people are buried here at Mount
We
Olivet?
have over 41,000 interments here in Mount Olivet. They used to call, back in the 1800s, they marketed Mount Olivet as Frederick's City of the Dead. Now, you're not... Today, you know a lot about marketing. You're not going to catch a lot of flies with that. I think then they kind of softened it in the 1900s to Frederick's Second City, or Frederick's Other City.
I gotcha.
But at a time where we had more people in Mount Olivet than we did in the city.
You also do courses to teach the average person here.
Yes, indeed.
About the history of Frederick. Tell me a little bit about how those got started, and I know you've got some coming up.
Sure. Well, kind of a convergence of two things. So I had started this side business, about 12 years ago, called History Shark, like the fin, Jimmy Buffett, History Shark Productions, and there's a long story behind it I won't get into. So I have done a number of things like writing panels for the National Park Service, or helping people with their genealogy, or giving lectures, or helping organization with their institutional history. So I'm kind of this history for hire guy.
Yeah.
And last summer of 2023, I decided to start teaching some of the classes that I taught for FCC, kind of reformatted some of them because I didn't have as many stipulations on my time. And I started teaching them, and I asked Ron Piercy if I could teach them here. So we teach them in this chapel that we're talking to you from here, the Key Chapel. It's also a good way of getting folks in the cemetery. And kind of people that have never been, or maybe are hesitant to come to the cemetery, to kind of see what a great history resource this is. I call it a museum without walls. But anyway, we started teaching. My first class I taught, I call it Chris Hall's Frederick History 101. Not because I have an ego, but because this is kind of my history
Right.
as I kind of based this documentary called Fredericktown back in '95. I take participants there from really the founding of Maryland in the 1600s to the 1730s, really is when things started getting hopping here in the Monocacy through the Revolutionary War period into the 1800s, the train coming through, the National Road, and then forward into, when was the first agricultural fair, up to the Civil War, of course, and then beyond with industry here into the early 1900s with suburbanization and the trolley and the hospital to Fort Detrick or Camp Detrick coming about, and kind of take it to the current day, the Frederick Flood, either a refresher course for longtime residents or for newcomers, an overview of this community. But I love talking about Frederick history, and I love those aha moments of being able to tell people, and that is why Mater Avenue is Mater Avenue.